And so I proceeded to be a young artist, doing young artist types of things. But one day, through a very long and not worth going through series of circumstances, I was on staff at Marvel, and somebody decided not to write a script. So they said, "You over there in the corner, you want to write this thing?" And I said, "Yeah." And then it turned out I liked writing it, and they liked what I wrote, and so they offered me more. And then art kind of fell by the wayside.
Were you part of, was it the Krusty Bunkers? Were you one of those?
Well, no, I was the proto-Krusty.
Oh, okay.
There was just me in the beginning.
Oh, okay.
And I guess it, Neil liked the concept well enough that then he ended up getting a bunch of people to do that sort of thing.
So you were co-writing to begin with, or were you writing on your own?
Both.
Friend, it's a bit of both.
Both. I mean, Marvel in those days still published westerns and romance and monster books and so forth. And so the way it worked was, if they decided to let you write, you wrote those things so that if you flamed out, it wouldn't be affecting Iron Man or whatever. But they continued to like what I did, and so you kind of moved up until one day he said, "You want to write The Beast?"
Yes.
They started the series, and then from the time that they offered me The Beast to a year later, I picked up The Beast, Captain America, Avengers, Defenders, Doc Savage, Hulk. I can't even remember. But it was just like, with comics, it's like, if they like what you're doing, they'll offer you some more. And so long as you can actually do it, you can do that, and they'll offer you more. I eventually topped out at 4 books a month. And when I topped out at 4 books a month, then they said, "You want to do Doctor Strange?" So then I had to fit that in too. But yeah, it went from 0 to 60 very quickly.
So were you working in the bullpen when you were writing these things? I know it was for the art side, but were you in the office, or was it from home you were writing?
At first in the office. When I first started, I was still working in the office. And then when I started to get a lot of writings, I didn't want to take the time to commute. So I just, I mean,
do you think it's because you were in the office that gave you sort of like the advantage, if you like, because you happen to be there, we need to get this book written, and we've got Steve there, so we'll get him to do,
Yeah,
that guy over there to write.
Exactly. Well, that was the deal. I was the guy over there, so if it had been somebody else, he would have gotten the shot.
Yes.
But they, and I almost didn't want it. I didn't want a staff job really, but I took it, and then everything else came out of it.
I mean, when you were a kid, were you a Marvel or a DC reader?
DC.
You were a DC reader.
Yeah. Sadly, I'm old enough to say that the stuff I was reading as a kid was in the 50s, and that was Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman.
Yes.
There really wasn't anything else.
But when Marvel started, did you become a Marvel reader?
No, not until Marvel started in '61, and I didn't get into it till '66, which was still pretty early. But no, I discovered it long after it started. But it was still early enough in the whole process that after I discovered it in the spring of '66, I spent the summer of '66 going around to used bookstores and old, antique stores and so forth, looking in their bins, and and I got Spider-Man #1 for a nickel.
Well, back then it
that you could do that. So.
Yes. So you weren't a Marvel reader, but you sort of fell into writing for Marvel. Obviously, you did a lot. I mean, I want to talk about Shang-Chi a little bit, which you sort of co-created. I mean, '70s was interesting because a lot of characters, there's kind of kung fu. But what was the genesis of Shang-Chi?
It was the TV show Kung Fu.
Of course.
Starlin and I saw that, and we said that's a character that we would, that kind of character is somebody we'd like to do. And we went to Marvel, to Roy. Did Roy just do a panel here?
Yes.
And said, "We want to do this," and Roy couldn't see any benefit in it at all. There was the panel we did 2 hours ago. Roy was talking about how Stan didn't see any benefit in Conan, and Roy didn't see any benefit in Kung Fu. But we really wanted to do it, so he said, "Oh, okay, you can do it." And then right after we started, the whole Kung Fu movement just exploded.
Yes.
And so all of a sudden, we were ahead of the wave, but then the wave came along and really carried us off, to the extent where they suddenly wanted to do the book twice as often, and they wanted a black and white book, and they wanted specials, and they wanted annuals. And so both Starlin and I, who had not signed up for something like that, bailed out. But then Doug Bench and Paul Gulacy took it over and made it fabulous in its own right,
But I mean, obviously, you've had such an interesting sort of diverse career. So there was that. Obviously, there was the Captain America stuff. I'm jumping around a little bit. But obviously, Cap, you wrote one of the most seminal runs on the book. So, I mean, that character was, you know, it's a very significant run. And obviously now, you know, in 2019, you've got, you know, Captain America is a huge character, you know, one of the major linchpins of the films. I mean, in the 70s, how did you see the character? I mean, did you ever think, I mean, obviously now he's, you know, he's arguably Marvel's Superman as a major, you know, patriotic character, but 70s it was a different time for the character.
Yeah, when they gave me Captain America, and that was like, when I started getting into superheroes, they gave me the Beast, and then like Captain America and the Defenders came together like right after that, so it was very early in my career. And they said Captain America is a failing book. It's either going to get canceled or at least it's going to go bi-monthly. Here.
Yes. Take it.
You're the little man on the top pole. You write it. And the problem was, I went home that night, and you know, this is sort of seminal in my career, but I mean, I went home and I thought about it, and I thought, well, the problem, I identified a problem, and it turned out that I identified it correctly, which was, they were still selling Captain America as the living legend of World War II, which
but in the 1970s.
Yeah, it didn't mean much in the 70s, no. And there was the Vietnam War, so a large part of our potential audience was not interested in war-related stuff. And so I was the guy, for better or worse, who thought, well, what if he stood for the American ideal, the one thing that they teach you?
Sort of timeless, basically.
Yeah, something larger than any particular present, you know, situation. So that's what I did, and then 6 months later, it was Marvel's best-selling book, which pretty much solidified my career after that point. But yeah, it was making him stand for something larger than any particular situation just seemed like the right way to go, and then it did work, and so then, you know.
I mean, there's something like the old Defenders run as well. I mean, I was a big fan of the Defenders. I read as a kid. I borrowed them from my brother. And the thing I liked about the Defenders is it's a very quirky team.
Right.
It's kind of like these second stringers, but it gave you the chance to do stuff that's more interesting, you know. And obviously you've got Avengers as well, which we'll go into in a minute. But the Defenders was something different. I mean, was that part of what the appeal was for you as a writer? Yeah.
Well, Roy created that, right?
Yes.
The Defenders concept, and then handed it off to me. And yes, I really liked all those people, the Hulk, Submariner, Doctor Strange, but they weren't team members.
No.
So the idea of putting them together as a non-team team was a brilliant idea on Roy's part, and then that's what I enjoyed doing. I threw in the Valkyrie eventually because we needed somebody who wasn't, you know, a superstar in their own right, and the Silver Surfer eventually. But yeah, and then we're going to touch on this, I'm sure. But so I was writing the Avengers and the Defenders, and then it got to be summertime when Marvel usually put out annuals, but they decided that year they weren't going to do annuals, and I thought, well, as a fan, having just been a fan, I really liked those special things going on in the summer, so I came up with this idea about why don't the Avengers and Defenders fight each other all summer, and again, it was the way Roy ran the company. You know, I said, I want to do this. And he said, well, you know, if any one of those books is late, everything will topple.
It's like a domino effect.
Right. So that's a problem. And I said, I will not screw up the deadlines. And he said, okay then. You know, I mean, that was the entire editorial oversight that Marvel had in those days. So, so I was able then to write all those guys. But by the time I got done with it, I thought, well, team books require certain types of villains, either a team of villains or somebody strong enough to fight all these guys.
Or something really big.
Yeah, and so doing two of them. Yes. And to be honest, I think I probably preferred the Defenders as a team, as a book to write. But I thought, I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to give up the Avengers. So, and you know, obviously I like the Avengers too. But so I had that brief period where I was doing both of them, and I was really glad to be able to do the crossover thing. But couldn't do both forever.
No. So Avengers, again, obviously iconic, Marvel's iconic sort of super team on Avengers. I mean, were they one of the books you read, you know, from Marvel? And again, was it something that you started flexing a slightly different creative muscle? Because Defenders are these kind of weird oddballs altogether, whereas Avengers is, you know, like the coolest Marvel heroes all in one place.
Right. There's that, and also, again, in talking about writing characters, I mean, part of the point of doing the Defenders was to make sure that they weren't a team, that they were continually going off in different directions and so forth. Whereas the Avengers were a team, and so I was able to play a lot more with, you know, the relationships between these people, these ongoing relationships, which the Defenders didn't really have. And there was such a range, and you could reinvent the Avengers if you needed to, whatever. So you had the big heroes, but you also had the little romantic subplots with the Vision and Wanda and so forth. In many ways, I mean, again, I don't know. I mean, I liked everything at on some level or another. So, but that was fun to do. And you mentioned the long run. I mean, in those days, again, if you got a book, you just stayed on the book. It wasn't one of these, let's write 6 issues and put it in a graphic album kind of thing, which I enjoyed. I mean, writing these people over time and seeing how they developed, that was fun too.
So Star-Lord was your co-creation, is that right? So what was the emphasis with that?
Marvel was doing black and white books that didn't have to fall under the Comics Code Authority, and so they asked me to come up with something, and I came up with this guy. I tell this story all the time, but the guy I created was completely unlikable. I wanted a really antisocial, an anti-hero. And my idea for the series was going to be totally different from what you saw. But I mean, my idea was he would start out as this really antisocial guy, and then he was going to travel out through the solar system. And at each planet, he was going to have a story, an entire issue, devoted to the mythology of that world. So when he got to Venus, it would be like a love story. And I even wanted to get different artists. I wanted to go get a love story artist to draw it. And then the next place would be Mars, and it was going to be a war story. And
so each artist would tailor to the story.
Yeah, and get Joe Kubert or get some some war story guy to do that. That was my idea, right? But I only wrote the first issue, and then I left the company unexpectedly. But I left, and so then it was left to Chris Claremont and other people to kind of go, what are we supposed to do with this guy, you know? And so they started taking the edges off and sending him on the trajectory where he got to where he is now.
I mean, how do you feel about, because obviously now he's been in 3, 4 massive movies, the idea of this guy that you created has suddenly got a huge life of his own outside of the original creation? Yeah,
well, I mean, the movies tend to do that. I mean, Mantis is in those movies too, and the Mantis in the movies is totally not connected to the Mantis that I created in the comics. I like the Mantis in the movies. I like the movies, so that's fine, but it's,
different beast,
different beast, and so much of that is, well, I mean, if I had made a list of the people that I created who were going to become major movie stars, Star-Lord would have probably been at the bottom of that list. It was not. I didn't get to do what I wanted to do. So in my brain, it was always kind of like a failed experiment. So when I heard that they were going to do Star-Lord in a movie, I was like, what the heck? But I did like the movies quite a lot, so it's fine.
I mean, I guess we'll touch on one more Marvel thing before we move on. I mean, Doctor Strange, it was another very well-regarded run. You got to work with Frank Brunner and to work with Gene Colan as well. And Brunner, I thought, was a very underrated artist. I mean, how did that come about? I mean, obviously, you've written Strange and Defenders. I mean, is that how that happened?
Well, I had written Strange and Defenders, and I had written him sort of, as a magician superhero thing. I mean, it didn't get real heavy into the magic.
No.
Other than, because it had to fit in with an action thing with the Hulk and Submariner and all. And then I left that. But Brunner had been drawing Doctor Strange with another writer who was kind of old school, and Brunner kept having all these ideas that he wanted to do, but the other
poo-pooed it, so I don't really want to do that.
Yeah. So Brunner came to me, and we were all young guys again. All in New York. There was a whole bunch of us: Jim Starlin and Don McGregor and Steve Gerber, and so he came to me and said, would you write Doctor Strange for me? And that's what I was starting to say before. I had sort of gotten to the point where my plate was full, and then he said, you want to do Doctor Strange? And it's like, yeah, I kind of do. So I made that happen. And that was a unique relationship because Frank did have ideas about things that he wanted to see, I had ideas about things I wanted to see, and so what we would do every couple of months, because it was a bi-monthly book, was
Yes.
either he'd come up to my place in Connecticut, or I'd go down to his place in New York, and we'd have dinner, and then after dinner we would just sit there as long as it took, sometimes till 4 in the morning,
Wow.
kind of going, okay.
Back and forth.
Yeah, because it was my job in the end to make sure that it was a coherent story,
Yes.
right? Not just a bunch of weird ideas. So we would be, talking back and forth and saying, well, what if we did, so it was very much a co-creation thing with Brunner. But he was a slow artist, and when the book was popular enough to go monthly, then he had to drop off.
Speed, basically.
Yeah. Then Gene Colan took over, and Colan just wanted to draw it.
Yes.
And they were totally different, because Brunner was, I don't know that he is underrated. I mean, he's only famous for that and Howard the Duck, but he's pretty famous for those things.
Suppose.
But
People don't talk about him much these days, it seems, because
Really?
the guy had a career that ran for, I guess it was about 10 years, and then he sort of disappeared.
yeah, I suppose. But anyway, I mean, Brunner's stuff, people who are into Doctor Strange, they love Brunner, and so do I love Brunner. They don't think so much of Gene Colan
Really?
with Doctor Strange, because Colan is famous for many other things.
Tomb of
But
Dracula and...
yeah,
Post-shooter, there seems to be a lot of change
Mhm.
in Marvel, and I just wanted to get a feel for what was it like, late 80s, second half of 80s in Marvel, and your journey to Valiant and after that.
well, I mean, again, when I got into comics, I was given complete creative freedom, and that was the atmosphere that Roy engendered. But Roy left, and and eventually Shooter took over. And Shooter, apparently I was not working at Marvel when Shooter took over, but people were missing deadlines. It was getting a little sloppy, and so Shooter sort of took it as his mandate to make the trains run on time, which he did. But then, of course, that means that there's more control and there's more of this and that. And Shooter was mercurial too. I mean, Shooter would suddenly decide that he didn't like somebody, and then he would make life tough for them. He never did that to me. I mean, I've heard stories from many other people about what life was like when he did do that to them, but he didn't do that to me, so I had no particular beef with Shooter. But then he left. And when he left, Tom DeFalco became the editor, but I don't think this was all decided above Tom's pay grade. But that's when they first started going, well, the guy who owned the company at the time, Revson, from the Revlon people, but he owned the company, he was famous for saying, this is a cash cow, why aren't we, making more? Yeah, and so I was writing Silver Surfer, and when I got the Silver Surfer, I was really sell the Fantastic Four with Reed and Sue in it if they're not in the book, so we need you to stop doing that. That to me was the end of the Marvel age, '89. And that's when I said, no, that's not what I signed up for. I don't want to do that either. So I left Marvel at that point. I went and wrote children's books for a while. I had young kids at that time, and I ended up writing books for Avon, children's stories, young adult stories. And then Malibu got started, and they came and they said, we want you to be one of the people who do this sort of thing. And they gave us complete creative freedom. Steve Gerber was another writer who ended up there. And I can remember Gerber and me sitting around one night just going, we were like the lobsters in the pot, right? I mean, little by little, the freedom had been sort of stripped away, and now all of a sudden we got it back again. We're like, wow, this is really, cool. We loved Malibu. We loved Malibu. But Marvel went bankrupt, and they took everybody down with them. And Malibu had a lot of money because they had been publishing Image before Image decided to publish Image. So Malibu had a lot of money, but in the end, they still ran out of money, and so Marvel bought them primarily because Malibu created the whole Photoshop coloring thing, and Marvel bought Malibu in order to get those guys, not for anything else. So I was doing some work for Topps at that point, I think, but basically that's when I sort of started to think, yeah, this business is really not the business that I was looking for. And wrote I did video games, I did, a bunch of other things besides comics. dropped back in briefly in the early 2000s, did a couple things for Tom Brevoort at Marvel. But again, that's when it first started to come down to, I think that's what I was saying. They came to me at one point and said, we actually want to bring the Ultraverse characters back. We'd like you to write a book that would be, all the major Ultraverse characters. Later on, they looked at the contracts, and so they said, no, we're not going to do that. But for a while there, that's what I was working on. But they wanted to know, what are the first 12 issues going to be? And that was really bizarre to me, because I'm so used to just sort of writing in the moment. I mean, I'm certainly, as a professional writer, I would think about, okay, where is this going to go? How is this arc going to play out? But I didn't plot it out. I just sort of thought it's going to end up over there, and I'll get there as I'm doing everything else. The idea of, starting a series and a year later just kind of going, oh yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do in issue 12, that really didn't appeal to me. So that's, it was after '89 that I started to kind of move away from comics, because I just couldn't do the, I mean, what can I tell you? If I had started in the business and they said, the way this works is we're going to have complete creative control and tell you what to do, which is what anybody starting in comics now would probably run into. It's like, yeah, okay, well, that's the deal. That's how the job works, but that isn't how it worked for me. So.
Any other questions?
Yeah, there was definitely, Steve, for fans of our vintage, a feeling that you guys, Gerber, McGregor, Wolfman, were just these mad, crazy nuts running around New York going, we can do whatever the hell we want.
Yeah.
Did you hang out together? Did you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Starlin and I, and a guy named Alan Weiss, and Milgram to an extent, we were sort of a crew. But yeah, we were all, in those days you pretty much had to move to New York. It was before the internet, it was before FedEx. So you sort of had to physically be able to go to the office and hand people stuff and pick stuff up. That was like the first step to becoming a comic book person, was to move to New York. Once I got established, I was able to move out of New York, and many nights I would like write until 4 in the morning and then drive down to the post office and buy a bunch of stamps out of the machine, mark it special delivery, and send it off, and a day and a half later it would get to New York.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Portsmouth Comic. Just to remind you, at 2 o'clock our next panel, which is panel room 1 on the second floor, Sharp talks the Green Lantern. In panel room 2, we have From Wonder Woman to Captain Marvel, empowering women in comics and films. And then on the main stage outside in the beautiful square, we have our Jedi class. Don't forget, we have got things on all levels today. We've got things on the basement, the ground floor, the first floor, the second floor, and the upper second floor and third floor. And don't forget the University of Portsmouth in the law factory room, if you'd like to enjoy that. Thank you very much.
Okay, so on that note, I'm going to thank Steve. I believe that menswear is on the second floor, coats on the third, and...
Well, my day has been sort of broken up by doing this. I did an hour at my table, then an hour with Stan Lee, then an hour at my table, then this hour, but I'll be at my table for the rest of the day, so if you didn't get your question answered, come on down to the table.
So thanks to everyone for coming. Thank you to Steve.